Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. While all this sounded like a long story, the truth was that it had happened in an instant. In that instant, 10 wards of bad luck had been changed. The sky blue ink seeped into it, and brought about a 180-degree change. The unique magical wave of the ward of bad luck seemed to have suddenly disappeared without a trace. In its place was an aggressive magical wave, and everyone felt its powerful strength as they stood before the light. They stared at it wide-eyed and dumbfounded, struggling to open their mouths, only to find that they had lost the ability to speak. The 10 wards of bad luck that Moke had laid down personally were altered by someone else in an instant. However, Moke did not feel insulted nor angered over it. Instead, he felt a deep sense of hopelessness and shock. This was impossible. A hallucination, this had to be a hallucination. Moke could not find it in himself to believe that what he saw was real. Someone had to be playing a joke on him. There had to be a mistake somewhere, or how else was this possible? An amateur who did not even know what a countercurrent mageweth was used for had tampered with the ward of bad luck he laid down, and even turned it into a mageweth array in an instant. Soon, however, Moke realized that all of this seemed to be real as the scene before his eyes showed no sign of vanishing no matter how much he rubbed his eyes. Bloody hell, this was not a hallucination, it really was a mageweth array, and one made out of 10 wards of bad luck at that. All color disappeared from Moke's face, and in its place was a sickly shade of white. He was a true master of inscription, and knew better than anyone else what a mageweth array meant. It was the highest level of inscription, the ultimate extension of the power of inscription. Even though Moke was a master of inscription himself, the closest he could get to mageweth arrays was to pay homage to one. Inscription making was born during the Dark Ages. In its 1,300 years of history, few had been able to master mageweth arrays. All of them deserved their positions at the peak of inscription, and they were known as gurus of inscription. Moke gulped as he tried to digest everything before him. While the wards of bad luck continued to shine, the magical wave they emitted was completely different. Actually, they should not be called wards of bad luck anymore, as their core circuit had been completely changed earlier. Lying before Moke was now 10 brand new mageweths. They were all tightly interlocked, forming an incredibly strong mageweth array. There was little wonder in how Moke had thrown away his dignity. This was all beyond his imagination. Not even in his wildest dreams did he think that he would one day see a mageweth array before him. In inscription, 3 mageweths were enough to form a mageweth array, and that was already the peak of inscription. Whenever mageweth arrays were involved, there would be countless permutations of every magic node and magic circuit, and no inscriber would be able to grasp them fully, as it was an astronomical figure that was simply impossible for a human brain to handle. Besides that, there was the distribution of mana to consider. The distribution of mana required in a mageweth array was nothing short of strict. If the margin of error allowed in a common mageweth was the size of a grain, then the margin of error allowed in mageweth arrays was that of the width of a strand of hair, a mosquito's hair, at that. Moke had already become a master of inscription in his 40s, and while he was confident in himself, he knew that there was no way he would be able to create a true mageweth array in his lifetime. It was simply too insane a task, and was impossible for a mortal to achieve. Today, however, somebody he had thought of as an amateur, a young mage who probably could not even grow a proper beard yet, had completed a mageweth array in an instant. On top of that, it was a mageweth array comprising 10 mageweths. If 3 mageweths was already as difficult as scaling a mountain, what about 10? Moke felt his skin crawl just thinking about it. He did not even dare to think about the 10 mageweths, as it was way beyond his comprehension. If the difficulty of 3 mageweths could be compared to being a magic shooter, then 10 mageweths would without a doubt correspond to being a sanctuary master. The 10 shiny mageweths stunned Moke. His gaze was unfocused as he skimmed through the 10 mageweths before his eyes landed on the young mage he had thought was an amateur. Fellick, this, Herz's voice sounded forced. While he was not well versed in inscription, in that instant, even a fool could tell that Moke, who they had thought of as an authoritative figure in epigraphy, was so stunned by the young mage that he was now lost for words. Herza felt that he should give Moke a hand. This, Lin Li smiled as he did not bother to hide anything from them. This is just something I came up with while I was bored in the past. I like to call it the all-kill array. Perhaps Lin Li was the only one who knew that he really was not lying this time. Back when he had participated in the trials in Alana, he had coincidentally followed Andoin into the Nightmare Mountains, and also coincidentally found a strange piece of crystal. Since then, Lin Li toyed with the idea of creating ManhwaRecap arrays. Only, the advanced ManhwaRecap arrays required too many things, and were impossible even for a guru of inscription. Hence, he thought of more basic ManhwaRecap arrays. Besides entertaining it, he had even tried it personally. The difficulty in constructing a basic ManhwaRecap array was much smaller than that of making an advanced ManhwaRecap array. Hence, Lin Li had managed to create his first ManhwaRecap array on his first try. While it was not as powerful as he would have liked it to be, it was a ManhwaRecap array, after all, and being able to create one was already a huge achievement per SE. If he wanted it to be more powerful, that was simple enough. Since 5 ManhwaRecaps were not enough, he would just add another 5. It was after all only a basic ManhwaRecap, and even if he were to add a few more, the level of difficulty did not rise too much except for the process becoming slightly more complicated. Given Lin Li's abilities now, he could create at most 10 ManhwaRecaps. Thus, the all-kill array, which consisted of 10 ManhwaRecaps, was born. As for why he had let Moke lay down 10 wards of bad luck first. It's boring to create a ManhwaRecap, and if Mr. Moke doesn't mind helping, why don't I just let him do it? Of course, Lin Li kept this to himself. If Moke heard this, then things were going to turn ugly. All-kill array? Herza nodded, but did not seem to understand. He had no idea what an all-kill array was, but one thing he was sure of was that the name definitely suited it, as its strength was terrifying indeed. Herza even thought that if its strength was released, even he himself would turn into dust immediately. Herza could not even recall where he had felt any strength as powerful as this. It was comparable to that of legendary mages, perhaps only the 3 arbitrators could surpass it easily. Herza felt assured of that. Frankly speaking, he had his concerns about Lin Li squandering his time, even though he had yet to make a comment about it. Lin Li did not even seem to care about a position as important as that of being the president of Breezy Plains Guild of Magic, and after the tower had been built, he had only been here twice or thrice. Herza heard that he had even gone to Roland City some time ago. Thankfully, he managed to return in time for the inauguration ceremony. However, Herza felt assured now that he had seen the all-kill array. Seeing as the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic was so capable, he should not have to worry for now. President Felix, just as Herza was silently letting out a breath, Moke had walked over some time ago, and although his face remained pale, there was determination and a wild passion in his eyes. Can I ask you a question? What is it? What's so special about the countercurrent ManhwaRecap you laid down in the bottom of the crystal ball? This, Lin Li paused. To be honest, he had not expected Moke to ask this question. After a moment's hesitation, he patiently explained, "This is just something I thought of. Since the crystal ball can monitor the whole tower, why don't I try and see if it can monitor the whole Black Clouds town, and even the whole Dooland?" While Moke liked to think that he already had nerves of steel, after all the scare he had had for the day, he still nearly stopped breathing when he heard this. Let the crystal ball keep watch of the whole Black Clouds town, and even the whole Dooland? What kind of lunatic was capable of uttering such words? The only magic spells in the crystal ball were the Warlock's Eyes and the Mirror of Truth. It was definitely beyond insane to use them to control the whole Black Clouds town and Dooland. Fortunately, it was Lin Li who had said it. Moke had a completely different perception of him after seeing the all-kill array. If it had been anyone else, Moke would have spat in their face for patronizing him. But even so, Moke could not help the disbelief on his face. Is that true, President Felix? It's not strange, Mr. Moke. If you study the countercurrent ManhwaRecap carefully, you will not be as shocked as you are now. Yes, the countercurrent ManhwaRecap has its faults. It's not consistent enough and not lasting enough, and it's even unable to magnify mana enough. But don't forget that the circuit of magnifying elements is the true core of the countercurrent ManhwaRecap. As long as the circuit of magnifying elements is slightly tweaked, it will not be impossible to control the whole Black Clouds town, or even Duland. But if that's so, wouldn't it damage the crystal ball? Hee, Lin Li merely smiled without saying anything. Oh. I understand it now, Moke was not stupid, after all. After pausing for a moment, he suddenly understood it. He had asked a dumb question. While that was an impossibly difficult problem for most inscribers, President Felik was a freak who had mastered mageweth arrays and created the all-kill array, after all. So what if the countercurrent mageweth resulted in damage from mana? This guy could come up with at least 10 solutions for that. Thank you. After saying that, Moke bowed deeply to Lin Li. You're welcome. Lin Li merely smiled, and did not feel it inappropriate that Moke bowed to him, for he knew that the bow was not to show respect for him, but to show respect to the power of knowledge. Then, Moke turned around and left the tower. Would you like to look at other places? Of course, everything that happened today had been too unbelievable, and a look of disbelief remained on the faces of some of the engineers. As members of the Supreme Council themselves, they knew Moke's personality better than anyone else. He was not someone who yielded to others easily. Even in the Supreme Council, where there were many powerful individuals, he rarely conceded defeat willingly. Unless the other person awed him with their knowledge of inscriptions, it would be difficult for them to gain his respect even if they were much more powerful than him. Without a doubt, this young president had made Moke concede defeat willingly in terms of their knowledge of inscription. But why was he so young? The door to the secret room closed once again, and buried the light of the all-kill array in the dark. The gloomy basement room returned to its original state, and nothing seemed to have changed. However, Herza and the engineers knew that it merely looked like nothing had changed, as they could all feel the power that made them tremble in this dim lighting and musty air. The group followed the stairs up, and returned to the guild hall. The light of dawn was just seeping into the tower, and shone colorfully due to the refraction of the crystal ball. Lin Li stood quietly in the center of the guild hall and raised his head slightly, squinting as he surveyed the tower he had built along with the Supreme Council. True, Lin Li had not been there more than a few times during the months it took to build the tower, but that did not mean that he was unfamiliar with it. On the contrary, Lin Li knew it like the back of his hand, as every critical point was designed by him. For example, he was completely clear which underground room was used to store the source of mana for the power. In order to provide enough mana for the tower, Lin Li had even used the salamander magical crystal, the legendary level magical crystal Lin Li had stolen from under the nose of the sword sage of the storm back in the Fire Plume Ridge. Fortunately, this had all been done secretly, or he would have driven many mages insane with anger if they knew he was using a legendary magical crystal as the source of mana. A legendary magical crystal was a priceless treasure indeed, and it was not an exaggeration in the least bit. To put it simply, if there was a level 19 magical crystal and a level 20 magical crystal on the market, then the latter would definitely be sold at a price at least 1,000 times that of the former. Magical crystals above level 20 were much too rare, but there was nothing that could be done about it. There were only so many people in the legendary level in Amrel, and even if one was at legendary level, it did not guarantee that they would definitely be able to obtain a legendary level magical crystal. Both legendary level magical beasts and people at legendary level were comparable, after all, so who was to say that they would definitely win in a fight to death? Back in the Fire Plume Ridge, the level 21 sword sage of the storm and a few thousand adventurers from various mercenary corps were still forced into a corner by the salamander, and if not for Lin Li suddenly striking, nobody knew who would have won in the end. But the strength of a legendary magical crystal was deserving of its price. Any legendary magical crystal had a nearly endless supply of mana, and was a treasure trove of mana truly coveted by mages. Jirian had once said that if he owned a legendary magical crystal, he would never go meditate again. Jirian had not been exaggerating, as the mana in a legendary magical crystal was enough to last an archmage for life. Moreover, that mana was renewable. Each legendary magical crystal came from the most powerful magical beasts in this world. It was the continuation of their life, the inheritance of their soul. On some levels, legendary magical crystals had their own life and soul, and were vastly different from average magical crystals. They could even meditate like a real mage in order to gather magical elements from the air and turn it into mana. And that was what made legendary magical crystals truly valuable. Of course, the mana in the tower was awfully abundant with such an insane source of mana, but was it a little too abundant? Honestly speaking, Lin Li had been racking his brains over this for a while. Thankfully, it was not long before he came up with a solution, and he added a few interesting designs to the tower. Right, President Felix, this is, Herza suddenly stopped when the group reached the 4th floor. The 4th floor was strange indeed. The 2nd and 3rd floors had merely been libraries, pharmaceutical labs, and alchemy labs, although the facilities were all unnecessarily refined due to the strict requests of Lin Li, they had not exceeded the boundary of what was normal. However, the 4th floor was an entirely different story, and Herza even thought he had walked into a prison made from refined iron when he stepped into it. Everything he saw before him was covered in refined iron, from the railings on the stairs to the floor beneath their feet. Herza looked at the engineers questioningly, but they all shrugged their shoulders indignantly. Truth was, they had no idea what was going on, either. All they knew was that the young president had a special request, and had even provided all the materials, correct, all the materials. And thus, it resulted in everything they saw before their eyes. Lin Li smiled, but did not answer Herza's question, and only pushed open the iron door. A narrow room appeared before them, but compared to normal rooms, this one was insane. Herza could not help rolling his eyes as soon as the door was pushed open. There was no doubt that everything inside was made of refined iron, be it the thick walls or the floor they were standing on. The room was tightly sealed save for one window opposite the door. Herza could clearly see a bottom piece made of refined iron under the window. It looked like it was used to hold something. I heard someone mention that the Dwarf Kingdom produces an incredibly powerful crystal cannon rivaling level 18 magic, so I was thinking it would be interesting if I had about 10 to 20 crystal cannons firing around. Herza nearly lost his mind. Setting up crystal cannons in a tower filled with mages? And 20 crystal cannons at that. What kind of lunatic was capable of spouting such words? Herza handled the external affairs of the Supreme Council, and had been to every corner of Amril in the past few decades. Of course, he had been to the Dwarf Kingdom as well, and was not unfamiliar with crystal cannons. The truth was, the last time he had been to the Dwarf Kingdom, His Majesty Madoran had even personally demonstrated the power of a crystal cannon to him. He had to admit that it was indeed a terrifying weapon. But no matter how terrifying it was, surely Lin Li had to be able to use it first? Crystal cannons used nothing but mana, which could only be supplied by magical crystals, and not just any magical crystals. A level 10 magical crystal could only let the cannon fire a few times, and even a level 15 one could only guarantee a few dozen shots. It took all the Dwarf Kingdom had to offer to set up 18 cannons in their royal castle, and even then there were strict orders for everyone in the Dwarf Kingdom to not use crystal cannons unless they were really threatened by a formidable enemy. Yet this President Felix wanted to set up 20 of it. Did he really think he could fire crystal cannons like fireworks? Wait a minute. Herza was shaking his head when he suddenly recalled something. Earlier on in the basement, he had felt a shockingly powerful magical wave. Moreover, the engineers had mentioned that the young president requested for the source of mana in the tower to be placed in the basement. Could it be? The sudden thought that appeared in his mind scared Herza. The old man could distinctly feel a chill running down his back. After inhaling deeply with a pale face, Herza asked, President Felix, surely you have not gotten yourself a legendary magical crystal? Lin Li continued to smile and did not answer Herza. Alright, President Felix, since you're unwilling to admit it, I shall not force you, but I have to tell you this, even a legendary magical crystal cannot withstand the expenditure caused by 20 crystal cannons. Herza's gaze became solemn. This usage of mana is too scary, and even the speed of recovery of a legendary magical crystal would not be able to keep up with it. Besides, that legendary magical crystal of yours still has to provide mana for other uses. Perhaps it will work for a decade or two, but it will be depleted one day. By then, that legendary magical crystal would be completely destroyed. President Felix, I hope you can give it a more serious thought. This is a legendary magical crystal after all, something every mage dreams of owning. It has countless uses, and can even create a dozen archmages for your guild of magic. If you use it to fire crystal cannons, isn't it too? Herza was beginning to sound worked up, and kept repeating his last word before he finally settled for an adjective. Isn't it too much of a waste of natural resources? President Felix, you'll definitely destroy it, this is a crime. Alright, Mr. Herza, Lin Li never thought that the old man would get so worked up. I have to remind you that this is all your conjecture, and I never said I did that. Moreover, how do you know if I really have a legendary magical crystal? Herza paused, and only then did he realize that he had indeed crossed a line. But, how many mages could keep calm when legendary magical crystals were concerned? How was using a legendary magical crystal to power a crystal cannon any different from getting a dainty beauty to work as a construction worker? Any mage with a sense of shame would not let this happen. Why don't we go look at other places? Lin Li dared not touch this topic any further after he finally got Herza to calm down. The latter was already quite old, if anything happened to him, Lin Li would never be able to live it down. Of course, not everything Lin Li had said was a lie. One thing was for sure, he was not going to use the salamander's magical crystal to power the crystal cannons. The reason was simple, the salamander's magical crystal was not powerful enough. Lin Li knew this better than Herza, as his mental strength was much more sensitive than anyone else's, and he was able to tell easily what a magical crystal should be used for. For example, the salamander's magical crystal was definitely more than enough to provide mana for the tower's operations. It would be too much for it to power 20 crystal cannons, however. Additionally, there were weapons much more powerful than crystal cannons in Lin Li's plans, and they'd require even more mana to run them. For example, the all-kill array in the basement, that was more than 10 simple mageweths. When they were in operation, they used a few hundred, or even a few thousand, times the amount of mana required for just one mageweth. Right, and the crystal ball in the middle of the guild hall was another issue too. It would be alright to use it to watch the area around the tower, but the amount of mana required for the surveillance of the whole Black Clouds town or even Dooland would be an astronomical figure. If it was all powered by the salamander's magical crystal, then this treasure coveted by all mages would definitely be destroyed within 10 years. The eternal furnace in the void crack would have to be brought out sooner or later, and when Lin Li was designing the building, he had already saved a spot for it on top of the tower. There was a platform there, and 12 mageweths were already laid down on it. These 12 mageweths would fuse the tower with the eternal furnace and share the endless supply of mana from the fire WYRM magical crystal. That was the true core of Lin Li's design. Once he had the support of the eternal furnace, the defense system of the tower would be truly complete. But it was still not the right time yet. Even though Lin Li had already gained control of the eternal furnace, he was still lacking a key. Hence, Lin Li decided that he would have to go to Alana 3 months later and complete the final agreement he'd made with Macklin during the trial. When that was done, he thought that he should make a deal with Alana's Guild of Magic. If it had been in the past, he definitely would not have the capability to do so, but it was different now. He held the key figure that was Canoris, the great soul trader who had personally experienced the building of the mausoleum and was much more useful to have than a map that could not speak. Of course, there was no need for him to tell Herza that. After bringing them through the last level, Lin Li stopped at the terrace on the rooftop. Right. President Felix, according to the rules, you have the right to name this tower. Name it? Lin Li grabbed the safety railings around terrace as he looked down onto Black Clouds town. There was a platform filled with 12 mageweths above him. Perhaps in the near future, there would be a true sky castle floating up there. The power of the eternal furnace was enough to bring the defense of the tower to an extreme level, and there were 20 rooms made of refined iron beneath him, and there was even a large amount of eternal adamantine mixed into the refined iron. Each of those rooms would hold a crystal cannon, forming a formidable battery of crystal cannons. Last, but not least, in the dark of the basement was the light of the all-kill array. Lin Li was just like a ferocious beast waiting to take his pick of victims. When he brandished his claws and fangs, even if the three great armies of the Felon Kingdom attacked all at once, they would have to pay a bloody price. Lin Li stood quietly on the terrace as he let himself feel the mana flowing through the tower, finding himself thrilled at the thought of it. While he did not personally build this tower, he had put into it no less effort than these engineers. Of course, besides putting a lot of thought into it, he also provided a large amount of rare materials. It was no exaggeration to say that he had used almost half of the contents in the Ring of Endless Storm, and had devoted nearly all the money he had accumulated ever since he arrived in Amril to building the tower. But Lin Li did not regret this. Many said that attack was the best form of defense, but Lin Li disagreed. How was he going to attack if he could not protect himself? Take the war 1,300 years ago as an example. The High Elves managed to put a stop to the human army's attack with just 6 sky castles, and if Juresco had not reached the Sanctuary Realm, perhaps it would still be the High Elves ruling over Amril now. I'll call it the Tower of Dusk, then. Herza frowned slightly as he muttered to himself, Tower of Dusk? That's a rather inauspicious name. This young mage was only in his 20s, so why would he give his tower such a gloomy name? It doesn't matter, it's just a name, Lin Li smiled, and did not explain himself to Herza. He was not referring to when the sun set in the west, but to the bloody dusk 1,300 years ago, during the battle against the 6 sky castles. When Lin Li walked out of the Tower of Dusk, it was almost noon. Before he left, Lin Li asked Herza again if there was really nothing he had to do in the evening before he headed to Black Cloud's town. He intended to bring Norfeller and Ujfalusi with him to visit Mr. Basel in Duland. Who knew that just as Herza was setting out, Lin Li saw a few carriages coming over. They did not seem to be headed for Black Cloud's town, but for the newly built Tower of Dusk. What's going on? Lin Li paused. He had not had the chance to give out the invitations for the inauguration ceremony yet, and nobody besides the Supreme Council knew of the newly set up Guild of Magic. As for the Tower of Dusk, well, although he had spent a great fortune on it, the appearance of the Tower of Dusk remained shabby, and it looked just like an illegally built building, so there was no way it had anything to do with mages. Then what were those carriages about? Feeling suspicious, Lin Li did not bother returning to Black Cloud's town, and only stood outside the Tower of Dusk as he watched the carriages draw nearer. Lin Li was right, those carriages were headed for the Tower of Dusk indeed, and stopped outside of it. A middle-aged man wearing a grey robe alighted from the first carriage. He looked to be in his 40s with his thick beard and his strong figure, and if not for the intense magical wave pouring off him, Lin Li would have thought that he was a warrior. Besides this mage, who did not resemble one, more and more people alighted from the carriages. Lin Li counted about a dozen, and all of them looked to be pretty decent mages. The strongest amongst them was the strong-looking middle-aged man from earlier, whom Lin Li thought to be at least an archmage. The dozen of them headed straight for the Tower of Dusk after alighting from their carriages. "Good evening, Mr. Mage. I wonder what I can help you with?" Lin Li asked very politely as he stood outside the Tower of Dusk. "Good evening." The middle-aged mage nodded his head in greeting as his gaze stopped on the young man for a moment. Not bad, the place recommended by Mr. Basel was not bad indeed, and even a mage apprentice standing guard at the door could afford to dress in such nice robes. This Breezy Plains Guild of Magic was indeed better than the average force. When he thought of that, the middle-aged mage cheered internally. He heard from Mr. Basel that this Breezy Plains Guild of Magic was newly set up, and was in need of manpower. He was an archmage himself, and if he showed a skill or two, wouldn't this President Felix immediately make him his right-hand man? The middle-aged mage did not doubt this at all, as there were not many in the whole Duland city who were stronger than him. Well, Mr. Basel was one, and the few of those in the Castellan mansion too, but he simply did not care for any of the rest. It seemed like the welfare here at the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic was not bad indeed, seeing as a mage apprentice standing guard at the door was dressed so vibrantly. The visitor was an archmage, and if he decided to offer his services, surely he would be treated much better than a mere mage apprentice? If this President Felix acted right, he might as well join the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic and let Mr. Basel owe him a favor. "I would like to see President Felix." May I know who you are? Lin Li's smile was mixed with a bit of uncertainty as he could not remember if he knew this buff mage. Why were his first words, "I'm looking for President Felix," as if he knew Lin Li very well. My name is Gavin, you can call me Archmage Gavin or Mr. Gavin. The middle-aged man frowned as he felt somewhat uncomfortable. How dared a mage apprentice guarding the door question him? This guild of magic was really lawless. He was a dignified archmage, so how could he be questioned by a mage apprentice? Of course he would look annoyed. Moreover, he was one of the strongest mages in Duland, and was respected by people everywhere. To think that he would receive such treatment in this obscure town. What annoyed Gavin the most was the fact that he had already been standing outside the door for a long time, but whoever that President Felix was had yet to come out to receive him. Did this fellow really think that Gavin had nowhere else to go besides his guild of magic? When he thought of that, Gavin became more annoyed. If it were any other time, given Gavin's temper, he would leave in a huff long ago, instead of wasting his time on a mage apprentice. However, he could not do that this time, as this was something that Mr. Basel had instructed him on. No mage in Duland City dared go against Mr. Basel, not so much because they feared him, but rather out of respect and gratitude. Mr. Basel was someone truly deserving of respect to all the mages in Duland, as he had been looking after Duland's library for the past 50 years and shared his knowledge generously. In everybody's eyes, including Gavin, Mr. Basel was a teacher to all the mages. Only, he had always refused to acknowledge it. However, even Mr. Basel had to admit that he was the most influential of all mages in Duland City. There was no question that the mages would do anything Basel asked of them, even if he wanted them to destroy the castle and mansion with magic. Of course, Gavin did not dare protest against anything that Mr. Basel had asked of him. He was not against it, either. Well, he did have more freedom in the past, studying in the Duland Library and receiving Basil's teachings, and completing a few missions every month for the Adventurers Guild to earn a living. Gavin had spent the past 20 years like this, but he was not satisfied. He craved more power, and coveted expensive medicine, rare magical equipment, and the advanced magical books. These things came with a hefty price, and he would not be able to afford them with the money he got from completing missions for the Adventurers Guild. He knew the only way for him to enjoy access to such things free of charge in Amril was to join a guild of magic. With the support of the Supreme Council, most guild of magics provided resources including medicine, magical equipment, and books to their mages. This was lethal temptation to Gavin, who craved to become more powerful. The most important thing was that he did not want to spend the rest of his life in the library. He was already an archmage, and definitely one of the strongest in the whole of Duland. However, the name Gavin remained not known by most people. Be it ambition or desire, whatever it was driving his actions, Gavin simply wanted to be respected like the head mage in the castle and mansion, to sit in a luxurious carriage and have robes and a magic staff that cost millions. He wanted to enjoy the looks of envy and jealousy as he walked past others, just like the head mage. Gavin had always thought that this was what it was like to be considered a successful mage. Thus, Gavin did not walk away in a huff even after being questioned by a mage apprentice. Very well, Mr. Gavin, may I know why you wish to meet me? Huh? Gavin picked at his ear unconsciously, and said blankly, "What did you say?" Lin Li's smile was somewhat indignant, but he repeated himself. I said, "Why do you wish to meet me, Mr. Gavin?" This time, Gavin heard him clearly, but he still took a minute to process it. You're President Felix? Gavin felt his brain stop as he stared blankly at the person in front of him as though he had been hit in the head. Yes, I am Felix. Gavin's expression froze. He had been making guesses about President Felix's character and capabilities, but he had never once thought about his age. In Gavin's opinion, anyone who could receive the recognition of the Supreme Council and lead a guild of magic definitely had to be a respectable elderly man. He had even been racking his brains over how he should address this elderly man to express his respect without downplaying his own status. Then Gavin realized that his previous concerns were all unnecessary. President Felix was much too young, much too young. Gavin gulped, and stuttered when he spoke. You're really President Felix? Yes, Mr. Gavin, I am Felix. If you still have doubts, you can always ask the people in Black Cloud's town, many of them know of me. But, Mr. Gavin, perhaps you should tell me why are you here in Black Cloud's town? Oh right. Gavin came to his senses after Lin Li's question, and hurriedly retrieved a letter from his pocket as he rushed to introduce himself to Lin Li. My apologies, President Felix, your age gave me a shock. If I may, please allow me to introduce myself again. I'm Gavin, and I come from Duland. Mr. Basel recommended me here. This is a letter from him explaining the situation. Oh? Lin Li opened the letter and glanced through the contents briefly. Basil's letter was not lengthy, and Lin Li finished reading through it in a short while. There was not much in it, merely simple greetings and an introduction of Gavin and the rest. According to Basel, these people were from the library at Duland, and were some of the best mages. Gavin was the strongest of them, and had already passed level 16, while the weakest they had was already level 14. Basel hoped that Lin Li could make arrangements for them, and expected that they would be able to contribute to establishing the Guild of Magic. As for Basel, he was tied up by some matters, and would only be able to head to Black Cloud's town to fulfill his obligations in a couple of months. While Basel did not go into details of what he was tied up with, Lin Li could tell that it had to be a tricky problem to delay a legendary mage by months. It could not be an easy matter. Mr. Gavin, Mr. Basel has explained everything in the letter. Lin Li folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket before he extended a hand to Gavin. I welcome all of you on behalf of Breezy Plains Guild of Magic. It is our honor. Gavin silently celebrated the fact that he had not said anything rude when he mistook the president for a mage apprentice, or he would not know how to explain himself to Mr. Basel. But to think of it, he could not be blamed. Who had ever seen such a young president? Gavin still could not believe it till now. A 20-year-old president, was he crazy, or was the Supreme Council crazy? Whatever, it was the Supreme Council's decision anyway, and had nothing to do with him. A young president might be a good thing too. President Felix was only 20 years old, and definitely had much to learn from the other mages in terms of magic. Perhaps he was still trying to reach the realm of an archmage. Adding the fact that this guild of magic was newly established, and probably did not have many capable people, it would be really easy for Gavin as a level 16 archmage to be entrusted with heavy responsibilities. Young people were less stubborn too, and he might be able to influence this young president's decisions with his capabilities and reputation, and become the true holder of power in this guild of magic. Gavin continued his daydreaming as he followed Lin Li into the Tower of Dusk. Gavin was immersed in his daydream, and was completely unaware of his future fate as well as what kind of lunatic he was following at the moment. Lin Li carried out their registration as members personally. To be honest, he was in a pretty good mood. They were the first members of the Tower of Dusk, which meant that the Tower of Dusk was no longer empty now. The Guild of Magic was properly established, even though this was all due to Basel. From their previous conversation, Lin Li knew that Basel was heavily regarded by all these mages, and if he were to ever fall out with Basel, the majority of those members of the Tower of Dusk would not hesitate to attack him with magic, while the rest would most likely be chanting away. Lin Li was not concerned about that, however, as he knew this was only temporary. Such was the world, even the most unyielding of faith would not be able to stand the test of time. Their respect and gratitude for Basel was nowhere near the devotion that the lunatic followers of Brilliant's shrine had. With a bit of time, Lin Li was sure he could change their minds. Of course, he would have to pull some tricks, and he would need an appropriate opportunity as well. As for a breaking point, he knew it would be Gavin. He was the most ambitious of the group, and Lin Li could clearly tell from their conversation that he was deliberately trying to be polite and fawn over Lin Li. He clearly did not think much of Lin Li, yet he tried to downplay himself. What did it say? It meant that he had something to ask of the Guild of Magic. His ambition and greed were weak points Lin Li could make use of. Lin Li welcomed such ambitious fellows as they were like greedy magical beasts, willing to put their lives on the line for a random carrot even without a stick. And Lin Li was nowhere near short of carrots. Lin Li twisted the ring of endless storm on his finger. It seems like it is time to churn out some medicine. After settling down the first batch of new members, it was nearly evening, and the sun was setting as the last ray of sunlight fell on the balcony of the Tower of Dusk. Lin Li stood quietly next to the crystal ball as he contemplated the inauguration ceremony in 3 days and how he was going to win Basil's men over. At this moment, a flurry of footsteps came from the door. Mage Velik. Mage Velik. I beg of you, please save my father. Just as Lin Li was becoming suspicious, a young man covered in blood rushed through the door. Garso? Lin Li felt his heart skip a beat when he recognized the young man. He was Uncle Salet's son, the thug from Duland, Garso. Lin Li panicked. He hurriedly helped Garso sit down as he checked his injuries, and asked, "What happened to Uncle Salet?" "My father, he was injured by the Sire bandits, heavily injured." Mage Velik, I beg of you, hurry and save him. What happened exactly? Just now, my father and I were going to have our meal just now when a group of men suddenly barged into our house. They said they were from the Sire bandits, and were looking for the mage who injured their men. They asked father where you were, but father refused to tell them, so they... Lin Li checked Garso's injuries and realized they were all superficial injuries. While they looked serious, his internal organs were not injured. Lin Li let out a breath of relief, and retrieved a recovery potion from his pocket as he called Gavin over. "Gavin, could you come over? Please look after him. I have some matters I have to attend to in Black Cloud's town." "All right, President Velik." Lin Li was already clenching his fists as he stood up, but then another flurry of footsteps could be heard from the door. It was louder and messier this time. It seemed like a group of men was rushing to the Tower of Dusk. "Looks like I don't need to make a trip." Lin Li stopped as he passed the recovery potion to Gavin. "I'll go receive some guests, help me make sure he drinks this." Sunlight fell on Lin Li as he stood outside the tower. Not far ahead, about a dozen men were rushing over. They were already nearing, and Lin Li could clearly see that most of them were armed and looked ferocious. One look and he could tell that these people killed for a living. Lin Li was not worried about them, however. He was more concerned about the blood-covered old man in the middle of the group. "I heard you were looking for me?" Lin Li stood outside the tower with a smile. "It's this fellow, Captain Pierre. This fellow injured us and stole our clothes," someone from the group shouted immediately after hearing Lin Li's voice. From afar, Lin Li found the man familiar, and after taking a close look, he realized something. Wasn't he one of the bandits he forced to run around naked in Black Cloud's town? "You're Velik?" The groups of bandits surrounded the tower's door. Their leader was a buff man in his 40s, with a thick beard and hairy chest. He looked just like a bear standing on 2 legs. "That's right, I am Velik." Lin Li nodded his head as his gaze skimmed past the bear and fell on the old man. "I thought the Sire bandits were reputable. How come you have resorted to kidnapping old men?" "Pfft, this old man is not worthy of our abduction." The bear spat on the ground, disdain evident on his tanned face. "We merely wanted to know your whereabouts, but who knew this old fellow did not know what's good for him. He did not tell us, and even bit me. If I did not teach him a lesson, how can I survive in the breezy plains? But this guy is pretty tough. I beat him up for half an hour, yet he still refused to speak. Thankfully, his son is stupid enough, and brought me here after I pulled some tricks." "Is that so?" Lin Li continued smiling as though he was looking at a group of neighbors instead of armed bandits. "You went to such lengths to ask about my whereabouts? Isn't that a little too much? Cut your crap, I have no time for your nonsense. I'm here today to inform you that you're in luck, kid. My boss wants to meet you." "You mean Vanscore?" Lin Li paused when he heard this. He had thought that these men were here to seek revenge, but in the end, it was because Vanscore wanted to meet him. "Good that you know. My boss said that he will be waiting for you in the Dragon Mountains. If you don't turn up, you know what will happen." Pierre left a fierce warning before he waved his hand for his men to release old Salet. He thought for a while, and threw a few gold coins in front of old Salet. "Take this as compensation for this old fellow. Actually, I did not want to beat him up, but he was too stubborn for his own good." damn it, I'll pay for his medical bills. Right, my boss said to ask you when you'll be going. We'll send a carriage for you. Gavin, please help Uncle Salad over. Sure, President Felix. When Gavin brought Old Salad over, Lin Li carefully surveyed his injuries. It had seemed like the bear was right, he did beat Old Salad up for half an hour, so the latter was more heavily injured than Garso. One of his arms was broken, and his internal organs were heavily injured as well. If he did not receive immediate treatment, he might not last the night. Lin Li hurriedly retrieved a bottle of recovery potion, and had Gavin bring him a glass of water from the tower before he mixed the potion with it and carefully fed it to Old Salad. After the latter downed a bottle of the recovery potion, some color returned to his pale face, and his bloody wounds started to close. Only, his injuries were too heavy, and even with the magical healing powers of the recovery potion, he would still require some rest to completely recover. Lin Li held the unconscious Old Salad, and silently regretted being too soft the first time. He had stolen the bandits' clothes, but only killed one of them. If he had been harsher back then, perhaps this would not have happened. Thankfully, he had the chance to rectify his mistake today. Hey kid, are you done? I have no time to waste on you, I still need to report back to my boss after you give me your answer. I'm sorry, Captain Pierre, I regret to inform you that, Lin Li slowly stood up, not a trace of a smile on his face now. You're not going back. Bastard, how dare you toy with me? Pierre was famous amongst the Sire bandits for his bad temper, and only wasted his time on this young mage, because of his boss orders. He even compensated the old man, only to find out that he was toyed with. How could he take this insult, given his bad temper? Go, damn it, all of you attack, tear down this tower. Pierre waved his machete, but in his rage, he retained a bit of rationality and remembered his boss orders. Right, leave that bastard, boss wants him alive. The group of bandits rushed ahead following Pierre's orders, brandishing their weapons. Even Gavin was somewhat worried. He could deal with them without a problem as an archmage, but he was worried that they might hurt President Felix. How would he answer to Mr. Basel then? Gavin was an archmage, however, and had always been carrying out missions for the Adventurers Guild, so he was the most experienced in fights out of all the mages in Doolin's library. Thus, he quickly made a decision after a moment's pause. He raised his magic staff and conjured a shield in front of them before he tugged at Lin Li. President Felix, let's retreat first. Gavin originally wanted to drag the young president into the tower. While no defense had been laid down, it was still better than facing a dozen bandits, but Gavin did not complete his sentence before his voice trailed off. He suddenly felt a terrifying magical wave around him. There was no premonition nor any sign as the previously calm magical element suddenly turned violent without reason. It felt like a storm brewing suddenly on a sunny day as dark clouds gathered and thunder roared all of a sudden. The torrential magical wave was brewing a storm outside the Tower of Dusk like a surging wave. What's going on? Gavin paused before he suddenly remembered something, and whipped his head around. Then, Gavin paled in shock. Gavin clearly saw the young president standing beside him and raising his magic staff as he chanted indiscernibly. The torrential magical wave had come from him. Gavin could not believe his eyes. He just could not believe that this young man who looked frail and somewhat pale and always had a warm smile on his face could wield such powerful magic. Not only Gavin could not believe his eyes, the bandits could not, either. They waved their machetes wildly and cursed filthily as they tried to pounce on the young mage, only to realize to their horror that they could not take a step further no matter how much they tried to. This was because their legs were sealed in ice. Knew I. The sun had yet to set in the west, and the evening sky was painted red. Some sunlight still fell on them, and they could feel its warmth still. Yet, outside the door of the Tower of Dusk, there was a thick layer of ice that not only froze the earth, but their legs as well. This strange sight left everybody's skin crawling. Gavin paled. This was level 16 magic, Death Frost. Even he had only started learning it 2 months ago, and had only managed to remember the chant. As for the working of the magic, he was still in the midst of figuring it out. Yet, this young mage was able to unleash it so easily. Could a young mage in his 20s really be capable of such magic? Thank you for giving me the chance to rectify a mistake. A polite and warm smile remained on the young mage's face, but this smile was scarier than a magical beast brandishing its claws and teeth in the eyes of the bandits. What do you want? Pierre gulped. Perhaps to mask his fear, or maybe because he remembered Vanscore's bidding, this beefy captain mustered the last burst of courage in his life. I'm warning you, don't do anything weird. If you kill us, my boss will avenge us for sure. You don't have to worry about such things. The young mage continued smiling as though he was not facing ferocious bandits, but waving hello to his neighbors. However, in the midst of this conversation, a slicing sound made everyone's hearts clench. All they could see was the splatter of blood before the beefy bear collapsed like a rag doll. Everyone outside the Tower of Dusk was scared out of their wits as their eyes fell onto the body of Pierre. Nobody could believe that the powerful Pierre had died just like that. The sight before their eyes was undoubtedly real, however, and they could not refute it. The wound on Pierre was not big, merely a slit on his throat like that of a strangle mark, yet blood gushed from it like water out of a broken dam, spurting out of the thin wound. It was only a moment before the crystal-clear ice was dyed a scarlet red. My God, Gavin could not help hissing sharply as he took in a breath. Only he knew what had truly happened. That was a light and thin wind blade, only a light touch, and it had slit Pierre's throat. The one who had unleashed the wind blade was none other than the smiley president. Gavin stared blankly as he felt his skin crawl. Gavin only realized then that the seemingly mild and polite young president was a ruthless killer. He did not offer bandits a chance to explain themselves or plead. Instead, he had turned a person into a corpse with a wave of his hand. He was basically a cold-blooded beast, and even though Gavin had killed countless magical beasts and seen countless bloodshed, Gavin still paled at the sight of this young president's cold-blooded killing. He should not be a mage, he should have been an assassin, or even an executioner. At that point, Gavin suddenly realized that his previous thoughts were beyond naive. He had to be blind to think that this young president would be a pushover. To think that he'd thought of using his age as a weakness to try and control the Guild of Magic. It sounded ridiculous now. How could such a person be a pushover? Thankfully, he had merely thought of it and did not expose his intention, or else the corpse lying on the ground might well have been him. No wonder Mr. Basel had repeatedly warned him not to go against President Felix. He had thought that Mr. Basel did not dare go against the Supreme Council, but now he knew that this was out of concern for his life. Gavin, come give me a hand and help Uncle Saladin. Lin Li showed no change in his expression after he sliced Pierre's throat with a wind blade as though it was something he did all the time. He only rushed Gavin to help him as he supported the unconscious old Salat. Yes, Gavin finally came to his senses after Lin Li spoke to him, and stretched out his hand to support old Salat before slowly helping him into the tower. As for all of you, after handing old Salat to Gavin, Lin Li turned his head around, and smiled at the bandits who were still terrified out of their souls. Pierre's death still loomed over them, and as the cold-blooded sadist stared at them, even the bravest of bandits could not take the immense pressure. Have mercy, Mr. Mage. Yeah, please spare us, Mr. Mage, we were forced to do this. Yes, that bastard Pierre forced us to do this. Mr. Mage, just treat it as charity and let us go. Sounds of pleading were the only thing one could hear as the ferocious bandits hurried to bow before Lin Li. If not for their legs being sealed by the ice, they would have rushed to kneel before Lin Li to cry for mercy. I do want to let you off. Lin Li slowly raised his magic staff as the bandits looked on in despair. Unfortunately, I only need one of you to bring the message. Then, the dragon's eye on the magic staff glowed. My God, Gavin had just settled old Salat, and came back intending to ask President Felix if he needed help when he saw the chilling scene. The dragon's eye on the magic staff glowed, and the magical wave that made him tremble filled the air once again. A cracking sound later, the once stagnant ice seemed to come to life and spread out on the bandits' bodies. The ice climbed up their legs and to their chests before engulfing them completely, It was only a moment before there were more than a dozen lifelike ice sculptures at the door of the Tower of Dusk. Fear was evident in Gavin's eyes as he covered his mouth with his hands, scared to make a sound. Even in his worst nightmares, Gavin had not imagined such a scary sight. He was even somewhat angry at Mr. Basel for recommending him here. Did he not know that this fellow was a ruthless executioner? Gavin could not believe it. What would happen to him if he offended this fellow one day? He always prided himself on his magic, but even that would be of no use to guarantee his life. Before this young president who wielded the death frost so easily, his own magic seemed like child's play. Of course, Lin Li noticed Gavin's fear. His previous actions had to have worried the ambitious archmage. However, Lin Li had no intention of explaining himself. He lived in Black Cloud's town and was far more aware of what kind of group the Sire bandits were as compared to someone who spent their time in Doolin's library. They were true bandits who engaged in arson and robbery, and there was no crime they had yet to commit. They attacked villages and robbed merchants for years, and every one of them had at least a dozen lives on their hands, most of which were defenseless civilians. This was what truly infuriated Lin Li. In Lin Li's eyes, they were inhumane for harming civilians. Thus, killing them was no more than exterminating magical beasts, and he did not feel guilty about it at all. Moreover, they harmed old Salet, who was his neighbor for 2 months, an old Salet who gave him a share whenever he made something to eat. Lin Li could not forgive them based on that alone. Of course, Lin Li had no intention to tell Gavin this. Gavin, get people to clean this up and bring the one who's still alive to me. Okay, President Felix. Gavin was still in fear, but nodded his head regardless, and carried out the young president's orders immediately. Gavin was in awe and fear after seeing what the young president was capable of, in awe because Lin Li possessed such power at such a young age, and in fear because he might end up in their position. Hence, when Lin Li had him clean up after the fight, he agreed without hesitation. Gavin quickly called a few people from the tower, but as they started cleaning up, he suddenly thought of something. The young president said to bring him the one who was still alive. Did he hear wrongly? Gavin was a level 16 archmage himself, so how could he not know the power of Death Frost? That was the most powerful level 16 magic one could use in a small area. At absolute zero, the frost became sturdy ice and froze all enemies who attempted to come near. It could also freeze the enemy's hearts and blood in a split second. Even a magical beast would find itself in a similar state if it was ever caught in the death frost. The death frost had clearly frozen all the bandits, so where was he going to find one still alive? What do I do? Should I let President Felix know? The thought was dropped by him as soon as it appeared. Wouldn't that be questioning President Felix's orders? Gavin had no intention of doing that. Crunch. Just as Gavin was hesitating, he heard a faint noise. How's that possible? Gavin could not believe his ears. The faint noise had definitely come from the cracking of ice. Gavin froze. How could ice at absolute zero crack? Gavin unconsciously looked over toward the source of the noise. Then, the expression on Gavin's face froze. He clearly saw a crack in one of the ice figures. It started out as a thin crack, but as the crunching noise continued, the crack became bigger and bigger until it resembled a deep scar. Crunch. After the last noise sounded, the sturdy ice formed by the death frost really cracked open and shattered like glass. Through the fog, Gavin saw a pale face. The man looked really young, probably in his 20s. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Gavin recalled that he was one of the bandits. When everybody had brandished their weapons and tried to pounce on President Felix, for some reason, this guy had remained on his spot. Could that be why he had been spared? This sudden thought scared Gavin out of his wits. That's impossible, impossible. It was most likely a coincidence. The Death Frost was a true level 16 magic, and even archmages near the legendary realm had trouble executing it. Yet President Felix could do it with precision and spare one person while instantaneously freezing over a dozen others. This alone was driving Gavin crazy from shock, to think that Lin Li had even had the time to take notice of who had not picked up their weapon. Gavin really could not find it in himself to believe it. Coincidence, it must be a coincidence. Gavin desperately tried to convince himself, but for some reason, a voice in his brain kept telling him that there was no such thing as a coincidence in the world of magic. "Mr. Mage, have mercy!" The young bandit's cry attracted Gavin's attention. Although his lips have turned blue from the cold, he still knelt in front of Gavin when the ice cracked and hugged Gavin's legs. "Mr. Mage, please spare me, I was really forced into doing this, that bastard Pierre forced me to come here. Stand up and come with me. President Felix wishes to meet you. As for whether he will let you go, I'm afraid it depends on your luck." The young bandit's luck was good indeed. After a near-death experience, his life was really spared. The terrifying young mage allowed him to go after asking him a few questions on the condition that he brought a message to his boss. "Tell Vanscore that if he wants to meet me, he has to come to the Tower of Dusk himself. Also, I'm not happy with what happened today. If anybody else from Black Cloud's town is harmed, I won't mind tearing down his hiding place in the Dragon Mountains." Lin Li's message was given to Vanscore word for word, and the former militiaman of Sire Town and now head of the Sire Bandits was livid. He could not believe that there would be such an arrogant person in the world. Did this mage called Felix really not know what was good for him? He killed one of his men the previous time, and Vanscore had yet to settle the score with him for that. Yet he killed another dozen of his men this time and dared to threaten him about tearing down his hiding spot in the Dragon Mountains. Who does he think the Sire Bandits are? "Loke, gather all our men. I want a bloodbath in Black Cloud's town tonight. Let's see whether this mage Felix is really capable of tearing down our place here in the Dragon Mountains." Vanscore was fuming, but after shouting his command, he realized his most trusted captain, Loke, didn't move. This made him even angrier, and he thrust his leg into Loke's abdomen. "What the hell are you still standing there for?" "Boss, that Felix." "Mage Felix you speak of, is he from Gerosis?" Loke had only joined the Sire Bandits 2 months ago, but he was quite capable and witty. Hence, he had quickly earned Vanscore's favor and rose to the position of a captain. With 100 men under him, he was quite the figure amongst the Sire Bandits. However, for some reason, he had been dazed and pale after the news from Black Cloud's town was passed on to them, even stuttering when he spoke. "How the hell would I know?" Then is he in his 20s, and always having a polite smile when he speaks?" Vanscore frowned, and finally realized that something was wrong with the man he had groomed personally. While he had only joined them 2 months earlier, he was far more capable than any of his previous captains. He had to have his reasons for asking these questions. Unfortunately, Vanscore had never seen this mage Felix, hence, he turned around to look at the young bandit who was tasked with passing on the message. Yes, that's so." The young bandit hurriedly nodded his head. "It is him indeed." "Why, do you know him?" Vanscore frowned. He might be quick to anger, but he was no rash fool, or he would not be able to lead the Sire Bandits till today. He knew there had to be more to it after hearing Loke's words. "Of course I know this executioner." Loke's face was pale, and his eyes were filled with fear. "Boss, do you remember when I told you that I was from the Shadow's Nest, before I joined the Sire Bandits?" Vanscore nodded his head. Of course he knew Loke's origins. This rascal was a high-ranking bandit from Gerosis, but his little group had offended an important figure, and their group was extinguished. Only a few of them escaped, including Loke. Vanscore could not help laughing when he heard this, as he had guessed what Loke was about to say. He certainly wanted to tell him that this mage Felix knew some important figure, but so what? The Shadow's Nest was the Shadow's Nest, while the Sire Bandits were the Sire Bandits. The former had merely had a few hundred men, while the strongest of them was only level 15. How could they ever compare to one of the top 10 bandit groups in the Breezy Plains? So what if the mage Felix had an important figure backing him? Was he really going to destroy the Sire Bandits completely in one go? What a joke! Could that important figure be more powerful than the Castellan Arather of Roland City? Moreover, Sire Bandits had come a long way from the past, and he had recently found a new backer, one that could shake up the whole of the Breezy Plains with a nudge of his leg. The one who wiped out the whole Shadow's Nest in one go was this Felix. Loke's face paled as he recalled what happened, including that hellish sight by the Black River. It was a nightmare to him, and even though it had already been a couple of months since that incident, the nightmarish scene continued to haunt him, replaying in his mind every time he closed his eyes. The frozen Black River, the snowstorm that covered the place, as well as the familiar faces frozen in ice. Shadow's Nest was the strongest force in Gerosa City then, and with Patriarch Merlin's help, they had been able to take over the Demon Fall Valley, attack the Emerald Tower, and heavily injure the Archmage Jirian. The 10 greatest families as well as the 6 greatest underground forces quivered before the blade of Shadow's Nest. Loke had even thought back then that barging into the Castellan mansion and replacing the Castellan Isaac would not have been a difficult feat. Then, the nightmare began. And this was all because of the young mage named Felix. The first night he'd returned to Gerosis, he had managed to rein in the 16 ambitious forces, and the next day, he brought a group of people to attack the Demon Fall Valley. He had carried out a great massacre on the banks of the Black River, and wiped out the hundreds of members of the Shadow's Nest, leaving only a few who managed to escape the tragedy. Loke was one of the lucky few as he had been heavily injured at the start of the battle. He thought he was going to die, but after the Shadow's Nest had fallen, nobody took notice of him, and thus he lay in a bush as he witnessed the chilling massacre. The mage in the black cloak was like the legendary Grim Reaper, wielding both ice and fire as he brought deathly fear to the masses. Loke, are you King kidding me? Vanscore stood up suddenly. Under the yellowish light, the scar on his face made him seem all the more ferocious. I think you must be scared silly if you can't think properly, that's why you're spouting nonsense. Wiping out the whole Shadow's Nest alone? Is he a sword sage or a legendary mage? Shadow's Nest might have been a small bandit group, but surely you had at least a few hundred people, even if all of you just stood there, he would have to spend the whole day killing all of you one by one. Boss, listen to me. That's enough, Loke, shut the *CK up. Vanscore glared angrily at Loke. He had thought this kid was smart, and wanted to groom him, but to think he would be such a coward, afraid because of a young mage. Such nonsense, what do you mean he destroyed the whole Shadow's Nest alone? Who would believe such words? But after he had angrily scolded Loke, Vanscore did not mention anything about presenting Black Cloud's town with a bloodbath anymore. Of course, the leader of one of the largest bandit groups in the Breezy Plains was no boorish fool. While Vanscore did not buy the story about wiping out the Shadow's Nest alone, he knew he had to find out more about this mage Felix's background. Whatever it was, he was definitely from Gerosa's Guild of Magic, and definitely had some status there. If Vanscore were to really kill him, the people from Gerosa's Guild of Magic might come to him for revenge. While he was not afraid of Gerosa's Guild of Magic, he could not help thinking it was not worth it. He did not have any deep hatred for him, after all, nor was he losing anything. It was merely a matter of getting even. Vanscore thought about it, and decided to let the matter rest for now. He would have to find out more about Felix before doing anything else. Just when Vanscore thought he had handled this matter very prudently, another middle-aged man came in through the door. This man in his 40s was one of Vanscore's most trusted men. A group of militiamen had followed Vanscore to set up the Sire Bandits after the plague, and he was one of them. Over the years, Vanscore had trusted him deeply, and sent him to Doolan these few years so that he could build up a relationship with the officials and nobles there. Usually, he would not return to the Dragon Mountains unless something was up. Gabri, why are you back? Vanscore turned solemn at seeing the middle-aged man enter. Compared to carrying out a bloodbath at a small town or killing a mage, this was a more serious matter. Boss, I got another deal at Dooland. Oh? Vanscore's eyes lit up. Gabri had been overseeing some underground business while he socialized with wealthy merchants and nobles in Dooland. After all, the Sire Bandits had over 1,000 men, and they definitely needed more sources of income than just robbery. Hence, they did everything the wealthy merchants and nobles could not do, like kidnapping, blackmailing, and assassinating. Gabri was the one to oversee these dealings. They had allowed the Sire Bandits to enjoy large revenue for the past few years. Vanscore had always trusted Gabri in his work, and when he heard that they got another deal, His face lit up. 2 days ago, Lazarick approached me. Lazarick, Vanskor frowned at the mention of him before surprise was seen on his face. You mean the Castellan's son, Lazarick? Yeah, that's him. He wants us to help him get rid of a guy. At this point in time, Lin Li was at the Tower of Dusk, handling the level certifications of the dozen members who had just joined earlier in the day. This was not usually the president's work. Unfortunately, the Tower of Dusk was severely lacking in manpower, and there was only Gavin helping him out. Gavin recorded down the changes in brightness in the crystal ball as he asked Lin Li worriedly, President Felix, will we be in trouble after provoking Vanskor? Honestly, he could not decipher what the young president was thinking. He was clearly able to kill all of them, but he deliberately left a bandit alive to bring a taunt of a message to Vanskor. Wasn't he afraid of trouble? They were one of the strongest bandit organizations in the whole Breezy Plains, and if they really carried out an attack, perhaps even the Castellan of Dulan City would be uneasy. The Tower of Dusk only had a dozen mages now, so how were they going to go against the Sire bandits? Gavin was really curious as to what the president was thinking. I'm afraid they won't come for revenge, Lin Li smiled, but gave no further explanation. Gavin was right, he was intentionally provoking Vanskor. Well, the Sire bandits were tricky to deal with, and if they had to bring the fight to the Dragon Mountains, even Lin Li couldn't guarantee that he would be able to escape unscathed. But, if the fight was at the Tower of Dusk, it would be a different story. While they did not have the magical crystal cannons, nor the eternal furnace, they did have the all-kill array set up. But, just as Gavin was going to press further, the light on the crystal ball vanished, and he had to pick up his pen to record the result of the level certification. Alan, level 14 magic shooter. He's got potential. Gavin nodded. Yes, Mr. Basel said that Alan has the best potential out of us all. A pity, he's somewhat off. Huh? Gavin was shocked. If it had been any other day, he would have brushed that off as nonsense. Alan had improved the fastest out of all the mages at Dulan's library, and even Mr. Basel had said that he would definitely become an archmage within a year. How was that off? But Gavin did not dare say that now. This young president's abilities could only be described as beyond one's expectations after the spectacle he had pulled at the door of the Tower of Dusk that afternoon. Not only could he easily unleash a death frost, he could control it precisely and miraculously leave a young bandit unscathed. Gavin had been confident in his own abilities for a long time, but now, he felt as insignificant as a speck of dust in front of this young mage. Alan might really be somewhat off. He's too caught up in controlling his mana. He was controlling it even when he had to release mana into the crystal ball for the test on mana strength. That is not a good practice. A good mage should know when to control their mana and when not to. That is indeed a problem of his. Gavin pondered over it, and had to agree. Alan was fond of controlling his mana, and if a spell required 80%, he would never use 90%. Even Mr. Basel had said that this was a stingy method, and if he continued to be so stingy with his mana, he would definitely suffer later on. Unfortunately, this was a bad habit Alan had had for over a decade, and it was not easy to change. See, he did it again during the mana test. Actually, it's not difficult to change this bad habit. Have him come look for me tomorrow, I'll give him some tips. That's great, President Felix. I'll thank you on his behalf. The level certification of the mages was only completed at midnight, but Lin Li was in a good mood. At least he was now aware of the capabilities of the first batch of members the Tower of Dusk had. Including Gavin, there was a total of 17 mages. They were 2 archmages, one level 15 and one level 16, and 15 magic shooters, of whom Alan was the strongest, having reached the peak of level 14. If all went well, he would definitely become an archmage within a year. It seemed like this group of mages sent by Basel was carefully selected by him. Every one of them was a pretty decent standard. If Lin Li could make them loyal to him, these mages would definitely serve as a great source of strength for the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic in the near future. After completing the level certification for everybody, it was nearly midnight, and it took Lin Li late into the night to settle the accommodations for the mages, before he could go and rest himself. He walked down the stairs back to his bedroom as he complained to himself that it was no wonder that old fellow Jirian had tried to con him into becoming the president of Jirosa's Guild of Magic. This position was not an easy one indeed. Mage Felix, who knew that somebody would appear in the guild hall. Lin Li turned around, and realized that the person who called him was old Salat's son, the thug from Duland. Lin Li could not help feeling puzzled for a moment. Garso, is anything the matter? Garso opened his mouth to speak, looking hesitant. Just tell me, what is it? Lin Li's eyes were incredibly sharp, and he did not have to think too much to know what Garso was thinking of. This rascal most likely had a favor to ask of him. Don't feel bad. Uncle Salat takes such good care of me, and you're his son, so if there's anything you need, just tell me. I'll help you as long as it's within my means. I want, Garso gritted his teeth, before mustering his courage. I want to learn magic from you. Oh, Lin Li nodded his head, but neither rejected him nor gave his consent as he merely looked at Garso. Tell me, why's that so? Because. Garso kept repeating, but failed to continue his sentence. Is it because of today? Not just today, the previous time too, it has always been like this. Every time I get into trouble, father is always protecting me, but I don't want this to continue. He's old, and I should be the one protecting him instead. Today, when the bandits appeared, I wanted to protect father and escape, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't, I'm too weak, they could kill me with one hand. Garso started tearing up as he spoke. It's too late today, go and rest. Come find me in the study tomorrow, and I'll teach you some basics. But before that, I have to remind you that magic is tiring and dry, and dangerous too. If you are not mentally prepared for it, then we shouldn't waste our time. I'm not afraid of it being difficult, Mage Felix. Very well. The next afternoon, Garso came indeed. Magic shooter Alan was with him. Good, both of you are here, have a seat. Lin Li nodded and grabbed a heavy book on magic from his desk. Garso, this is a book on magic, go and memorize it. You will recite it to me in a month. If you get a word wrong, you don't need to come back to the Tower of Dusk in the future. Garso received the book and merely flipped through a few pages before his expression changed. But, Mage Felix, I don't know a lot of these words. Oh right, I almost forgot. Lin Li thought about it, and retrieved another book from a shelf next to him. Take this too, it's an introduction to the High Elf's print. It'll help you with the words you don't know. Oh, okay, you can go. When Garso left, Lin Li turned around and looked at the young magic shooter Alan. Alan, I need your help with something. Huh? Alan paused. Didn't Gavin say that the president was going to fix my weakness? How come he's asking for my help instead? Maybe President Felix does not know how to correct it, and is looking for a reason to brush me off? Alan could not help the doubt seeping through from his gaze when he thought of that. To be honest, he did not believe that this young president in his 20s could be capable of changing his bad habit, either. After all, even Mr. Basel had not been able to do that. Alan had been exposed to magic since the age of 8, and that had been over 20 years ago. His habit of controlling his mana was one that he had developed very early on, and it had turned into a second nature for him. He knew it was not a good practice, but he had failed to change it this whole time, hence, he slowly forgot about it. He could not believe it at all when Gavin told him about this today, but as he thought about it, he decided to make a Hail Mary effort. Even if they did not manage to change it, he was not going to lose anything. Hence, he came somewhat reluctantly. I wonder what is it, President Felix? While Alan doubted him silently, he did not let it show on his face. Nothing much. Lin Li retrieved a crystal from his pocket. This is a rechargeable crystal that will be needed for the inauguration ceremony 2 days later, but neither I nor other mages have the time to charge it with mana. Hence, I was hoping you could help me with it. Best do it quickly, it will be needed in a couple of days. No problem. Alan looked at it and realized it was indeed an ordinary rechargeable crystal, usually used to replenish a mage's mana. Given his ability, all he would need to do was to pump some mana in, and it would be good to go. Thus, he nodded his head and took it from the young president. "I'll be troubling you with it, then." "You're welcome." After watching Ellen leave, Lin Li lazily stretched. "Basil, this old fellow, is becoming muddle-headed. How come he doesn't know how to correct a simple mistake? If you want to deal with a miser, then all you need to do is exhaust his money and leave him starving on the streets for a couple of days. Sigh, it's so boring to deal with all this shady nonsense. My dear Mr. Vanscore, when are you ever going to come?" Nobody knew when Vanscore would arrive, but someone else did arrive pretty quickly. "President Felix, there is a guest outside who wishes to meet you." Just as Lin Li was feeling bored, Gavin came to knock on the study's door. "What an arrogant person," Lin Li muttered to himself as he brushed his nose and opened the door, and then saw Gavin's bearded face before his eyes. "President Felix, would you like to go take a look?" "Who is it?" He said he's your great Macklin." Lin Li's knees gave way, and he nearly fell to the ground as he clutched Gavin and hurriedly asked, "Where is he at?" "In the lobby." "Let's go." Lin Li nearly jogged over, and saw Macklin's mousy face as soon as he opened the door to the lobby. The old man was smiling as he chatted with Herza, but as soon as he saw Lin Li enter, his smile disappeared, and he started cursing him out. "Damn it, you little shoal, what an ingrate. It's been 2 months, yet you haven't written a damn letter to me. I have taught you in vain, you shoal. I was too busy. After the holes of the Supreme Council sent me to this godforsaken place, I have yet to enjoy a day of peace. Someone is here to give me trouble every day. See, I just got rid of a bunch yesterday, why don't you ask Gavin? Damn it, aren't those shoals from the Supreme Council being too much? See, if you must, go after the holes from the Supreme Council, it's got nothing to do with me. I was even planning to visit you in Alana these few days." The young and old cursed happily. They left Herza speechless since he could never be serious with them. Forget Macklin, he was already bold enough to steal from the Supreme Council's library decades ago, and had left a few arbitrators with a headache. One would be a fool to try and talk sense with him. Right, and the younger one was no better. For some reason, he was a talented mage that the Supreme Council had high hopes for. Even a few arbitrators paid great attention to him. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Herza, I'm not talking about you." Yeah, Herza, we've been friends for decades, why would I scold you? "I'm talking about the bunch of shoals from the Supreme Council." It would have been better for him not to explain himself, as he only left Herza more speechless now. He decided that what he did not see could not hurt him and fled the lobby, leaving the 2 lawless fellows to themselves. "All right, rascal, what is it you want to talk about? I don't believe you went to such lengths to chase Herza away only to chit-chat with me." He, I could never fool you, old man." After Macklin saw through his ploy, Lin Li was not in the least bit embarrassed, and merely laughed shamelessly before he brought his face closer with an unreadable expression, and continued, "How about we discuss a deal? Tell me about it. I've got something on my hands that Alana's Guild of Magic would be interested in, but given my capabilities now, I can't complete it alone, so I wonder if I can work with Alana's Guild of Magic instead." "The High Lord's Mausoleum?" Macklin was a man of great intelligence, and had already guessed what it was. "That's right." Lin Li nodded, and retrieved a new piece of sheepskin from his pocket, presenting it like a treasure. The sheepskin contained the translation of a high elf's print, done by Andoin after the Pharmacists' Guild convention. "This is the blueprint of the High Lord's Mausoleum, all the hidden levers and traps are recorded clearly." "Bloody hell." Macklin was in shock. He was well aware of what the blueprint meant. As long as they had it, Alana's Guild of Magic could avoid almost half of the casualties inevitable during exploration. Before Macklin recovered from his shock, Lin Li mysteriously added, "Also, I have a soul from the Dark Ages." He supposedly knows the designer of the mausoleum very well. The two of them only exited the meeting room when it was time for lunch. Nobody knew what they had been discussing this whole time. However, everyone, including Herza and Gavin, saw the two of them linking arms and looking chummy as they exited the meeting room, the smiles on their faces looking slyer than usual. Right, I forgot to ask you. The inauguration ceremony is in 2 days, surely you've more to do besides scolding me since you've come to Black Cloud's town so early? After having lunch at Black Cloud's town, Lin Li invited Macklin into the study at the Tower of Dusk, and they started chatting away. Why, you mean I can't scold you? Macklin glared at him haughtily. Of course you can, Lin Li brushed his nose. But besides scolding me, I'm sure there are more meaningful things in your life. Nonsense, Macklin gave him a petty glance. I rushed over here from Alana because I wanted to warn you, rascal. Lin Li paused. What do you mean warn? The Marathon family and the Dwarf Kingdom made an agreement last month to build a forging workshop in Breezy Plains. The Marathon family will provide the funds, and the Dwarf Kingdom the skills. Wilhelm's nephew, God, will be sent here to oversee it. Oh, and Wilhelm's second son, Lauren, will be sent here too. God? When Macklin mentioned this name, Lin Li suddenly recalled the teen who had resembled Matthias back in the Fire Plume Ridge. If there was somebody besides Wilhelm in the Marathon family that Lin Li was cautious of, it was undeniably God. Back when Argus managed to trap him in a cave, he had only managed to do so thanks to God's advice. He was no fool like Matthias. And there's another piece of bad news. There's more? Lin Li jumped. He secretly wondered if this old man was a jinx of some sort. Does he have nothing better to do besides bringing me all sorts of bad news? Anduin came to me a few days ago, saying that the people of the Brilliant Shrine seemed to be asking the Supreme Council about you. While they did not mention any names, the characteristics they provided were similar to yours. Have you offended any of them recently? I don't think so, Lin Li subconsciously replied, but then he recalled the banquet at Roland City and the young and beautiful paladin. It can't be. It was merely a couple of undead creatures, did they have to be so extreme? Fancy bringing in the Supreme Council. It was merely a couple of undead creatures, did they have to be so extreme? Fancy bringing in the Supreme Council. Anyway, kid, you'd better watch out. The Brilliant Shrine is not something to be trifled with, so don't ask for trouble. If those weirdos are annoyed, even the Supreme Council would be worried. Macklin was well aware of his apprentice's personality, he could not go one day without getting into trouble. Honestly, he would not be surprised if he really did offend the Brilliant Shrine. Got it. Hey, why don't you ask Los about it? That fellow is the Archbishop of Brilliant Shrine, after all, maybe he knows a thing or two. Yeah, I'll ask him about it when I see him in a couple of days. Macklin's news was bad, but Lin Li did not have the time to think about it anymore, as he found out something even worse the next morning. He was going bankrupt. Never had he been in such a predicament since he arrived in Amrel. At the arcane magic potion auction in Gerosis, he had easily made 1 million gold coins, and after that, he worked with the Mans and Saruman families to run an insanely profitable pharmaceutical business, earning him 10,000 gold coins a month. It was enough to make any businessman green with envy, and that was merely the start of it. After they got recognition and built up their reputation, as well as managed to settle down and secure major clients, his profits were definitely 10 times that amount. Logically speaking, there was no way he could be so short on money, as he had always lived simply, not too different from an average civilian. While studying magic might have cost him a bit, he had the Ring of Endless Storm, which allowed him to obtain magical ingredients from another world. Ever since he was an apprentice, he had never had any need to purchase ingredients. Now, it was different, and it was all because of the Tower of Dusk. Having millions of savings and an income of 10,000 gold coins was a large sum to most, but in the eyes of the Guild of Magic, it was barely sufficient. The Tower of Dusk had cost Lin Li way too much money because he had way too high expectations, and the cost of building the Tower of Dusk was way more than the Supreme Council's budget allowed. They were no charitable organization, hence, most of the excess had been paid by Lin Li, and he soon realized that his pockets were nearly empty. Since when have I become so poor? This was the second time Lin Li found himself desperate for a large sum of money ever since he arrived in Amrel. Well, the Tower of Dusk was built, but quite honestly, it was merely a shell. There were too many areas that had yet to be completed, which would again require a large sum of money. Others aside, even the 20 crystal cannons alone were going to cost Lin Li a great deal, and he had to buy them, or else the cannon room that had been built using a large amount of eternal adamantine would go to waste. Thankfully, he was going to receive a large amount of ice crystal metal soon. If he used it wisely, he might be able to solve some of his problems soon. The next morning, Lin Li went to Dulan to look for Kaman, who was busy with his trading shop. Mage Velik, you're just in time. I was going to look for you at Black Cloud's town this evening. Kaman hurriedly set his things down when he saw Lin Li, and welcomed this god of fortune with a smile. I have some matters too, but I'm not in a hurry, you can speak first. I received a batch of food from Roland City yesterday. I heard them say that it's for you. Kaman seemed excited when he said this. He really had good taste, working with such a resourceful god of fortune. The food was sent by a group of soldiers. They were all armed and well-trained, and probably the best army of Roland City. This god of fortune had to really be resourceful to have such an army send him the food. Could he really have rescued the son of Roland City's castellan from the Sire bandits? Kaman felt himself shake with excitement when he thought of this. If he could get to know Roland City's castellan, it would be like striking the jackpot. It arrived so quickly? Seems like Roland City is efficient indeed. When he heard that the food had arrived, Lin Li felt his spirits were lifted. He had heard too much bad news the last few days. Finally, there was something good today. If you're free this evening, get the dwarf over and exchange for the ice crystal metal, quickly. If it had been in the past, Lin Li would not have been so anxious, but it was different now. He had heard from Macklin yesterday that the Marathon family was going to build a forging workshop in the breezy plains. If they knew of the existence of the ice crystal metal, who knew what would happen? Alright, I'll do it now. Don't rush, I have something else to ask of you. Lin Li stopped Kaman quickly. How much do you earn from the mining business in a year? If things are good, about 1 million gold coins. Kaman did not dare hide anything from this god of fortune, and told Lin Li everything earnestly. It depends on luck too. To be honest, I have a group of miners myself, and if I find good mineral veins, I can do the mining myself, then the profits will be bigger. You have miners of your own? Yes. That's good, get those miners here, and I'll lead you to a fortune within 3 days. Sure. Kaman's eyes glowed, and he agreed without hesitation. When Lin Li left the trading shop, he had already given Kaman a bunch of instructions, of which the most important one was to buy a forging workshop in Duland, but according to Kaman, that would be quite difficult. Recently, for some reason, the rates of blacksmiths had skyrocketed. They used to be able to hire a low-level blacksmith for 100 gold coins a month, but now it had risen to 200, and even then you might not be able to hire one. I can't believe it, no idea which bastard is behind this. Lin Li knew which bastard it was, it had to be the Marathon family. They were building a forging workshop in the breezy plains, and while the dwarf kingdom would be providing the skilled workforce, they could not rely entirely on the dwarfs for blacksmiths. Given their wealth, the Marathon family could even have hired all the blacksmiths in the whole Duland. Lin Li was not worried, however, for the number of low-level blacksmiths. They had merely determined the amount they could produce, while the fate of a forging workshop ultimately relied on the best blacksmith it had. The time consignment store would hold an auction in a month's time. They would see if the Marathon family was really able to monopolize the blacksmithing industry of the breezy plains. When Lin Li returned to the Tower of Dusk, it was around evening. Everyone knew that the inauguration ceremony was the next day, and thus nobody went to disturb him, even Macklin. Hence, Lin Li enjoyed a rare night of undisturbed sleep. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.